good afternoon, and welcome to Stock Market Today. We're reporting to you live from our newsroom in Los Angeles. And on today's show, we're going to be taking a look at the charts of Lennar, Costco, as well as Essent Group. But first, let's take a look at the major indexes. It's Alyssa Corum here with Justin Nielsen. And Justin, it was another brutal day on Wall Street, adding on to yesterday's selling. We had the NASDAQ finishing down about 1.6%, the S&P and NASDAQ taking even harder hits, and the Dow joining the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 below the 50-day line. Yeah, so it was looking like it was going to try and rally at some point, but it just never really got traction. And so what we're seeing here is just more and more weakness. Now, granted, you have to put things in perspective here. We're only 4% off of our highs for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, 4% for the S&P 500, and about 6% for the NASDAQ Composite. So we really aren't off the highs that much, but there's a lot of fears out there. There's trade, there's recession fears, a lot of things are kind of starting to compound, and we're seeing a lot of charts start breaking down. We're seeing a lot of the individual stocks cross below their 50-day moving averages. We're seeing breakouts fail. All of this kind of starts putting you in a more defensive mentality. Exactly. Not a good time to be aggressively buying stocks, but rather being more on the sidelines. And now that we are approaching that 200-day line level across the board, we did spend a little bit of time there, both in May as well as in August. So we've seen this before this year. And we bounced right back. Now, granted, we didn't make much progress above the old highs. We're still, for the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones Industrials, we're still kind of at our January 2018 levels. So, it's still kind of hitting that area of resistance, but there's also a level of support. For the Dow, right now it's at around 26,000. The NASDAQ Composite and S&P 500, they have been kind of seeing that resistance level at the 50-day moving average. We've had a lot of persistent selling so far, so we could see a little bit of a bounce here, and where we go from there is what we're going to be really paying particular attention there. If we get a bounce and then fail, like once we get to the 50-day moving average, if we fail from there, that could signal, hey, we've got another leg down to go, but this could be a rally up to new highs. We don't know, so we'll have to just wait and see. Yeah, that's right. Very key to be paying attention to the day-to-day action right now. And let's take a look at some of those individual stocks that are sort of adding to our perspective of what's going on in the market, starting with Essent Group, because this was one of those recent breakouts that we were watching. And now Essent Group has triggered a definitive sell signal. Yeah, and this just goes to show that no matter how much a stock looks great and how things look like they're looking pretty rosy, you have to really look at the chart action and make decisions based on that. Now, in the case of Essent, this just crossed below its 50-day moving average line. A lot of times we like to wait before we act. We like to wait until the end of the week before we act on a 50-day moving average line cross on an individual stock. But if you bought this at the breakout, you probably didn't have much cushion, and you were probably getting around that 7% to 8% stop loss, and that usually trumps everything else. So now, it doesn't mean that you have to hold on until you hit that 7% or 8%. You can sell earlier. This was an obvious breakout failure. Right after the breakout, it came right back. But you can give it some room, but you have to be very cautious. When you don't have cushion, it kind of changes the way you handle your stocks. Exactly. And, how also do you kind of reconcile what's happening with the broader market? Because you said, if we do see a bounce here, someone might say, oh, well, even though this is technically triggering a sell signal, kind of want to wait for that bounce, but it's really important to not let those thoughts get in your head. Here's where you have to have a line in the sand somewhere. And once you cross that line in the sand, you don't want to start making excuses and say, oh, but if I just wait a little bit longer, because it could get worse. So you have to have your line in the sand somewhere. That's why we usually set that 7% to 8%. For Essent, if you were buying right at the buy point, you probably didn't hit your 7%. If you were buying above 50, a little extended, this is why it's very important not to buy too extended from the buy point. If you were buying extended, you probably were looking at a 7%, 8% loss, and that's where we say, you know what, you have to sell to keep that loss small. All right, very key to keep those proper buy and sell rules in mind. And last but not least, let's take a look at Costco, because Costco is finding support at its 50-day line, which is coinciding with the buy point here. So, and earnings are also on the horizon. Yeah, so there's a lot of things to kind of unpack here. You are coming right up to that level where it had
broken out of a base. So if you did buy properly, you're probably maybe even ahead a little bit. So it's not like you're at a loss right now, but there are earnings coming up. Those are tomorrow after the close. You are right at your 50-day moving average. So you could easily see support here, and it's in a strong group. You've got a lot of the discount retailers, especially if there's recession fears. A lot of times these are the ones that tend to do a little bit better, or at least stabilize your portfolio a little. So there's a lot of things that are going for Costco, but you have to keep in mind that there is headwinds in the market. This isn't the time to be starting positions and things. So, just maybe watch what happens with the earnings if you don't have Costco. And it might be a buy opportunity, especially if the market sees a little bit of lift here and a bounce off its current levels.
Yeah, that's right. And even though Costco is still holding up, I think this chart is indicative of the fact that a lot of the breakups that we have seen, there hasn't really been much progress that has been made.
Yeah, you're not getting that like, oh, wow, look at how much money I'm making. It's more like, oh, this one is kind of slow.
In there.
Yeah, hanging in there. And that's why we keep on using the term resilience.
Right.
It's not like, oh, this is going really strong. It's just, oh, it's not as bad as it could be.
Yeah, exactly. And let's also take a look at a stock that is really bucking the downtrend today, and that is Lennar, moving up big after its quarterly earnings report, tacking on a gain of about 4%. Now, this one is somewhat extended now from its last buy point.
Yeah, but here again, it's kind of showing you where the market is moving a little bit. The home builders have been showing a lot of strength lately. We actually were talking about this on Monday, how construction, a number of construction builders. And so you just have to look at where the relative strength is. And if this is something where the market is going to turn back from here and go up, then the first ones that should be on your radar are these stocks that have those strong relative strength lines and that have been holding up well or even making progress like Lennar has.
Right. You bring up a good point, because what's an investor to do when they are on the sidelines? Well, look at your screens and look for those stocks that are showing strength.
And that's why it's very important to remain engaged, have your watch list fresh, because a turn can happen so quickly. A turn can happen in as little as 4 days, where we can have a bottom and then a follow-through day. So you always have to be aware of that and have that watch list fresh.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Justin. And thank you all for watching. Before we go, we want to let you know that we will have a new episode of our Investing with IBD podcast out tomorrow. We have a new episode out every Thursday, so make sure you are keeping tabs on investors.com/podcast for when that comes out tomorrow. It's going to be another good one, as always.
A great guest, yeah. He's actually an attendee for a lot of our level 4s. He's been a very big follower of Bill O'Neill, and so it's going to be a really good show with Jim Roble today.
Fantastic. Make sure you check that out. And also, in case you missed it, we do have an episode of our Investing Strategy show out now. And this week we talked all about the IPO market with, of course, a very evolving landscape there right now. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.